Now I would like to invite Anil. First of all, I would like to introduce him. So he is our guest speaker for tonight, and we are very thankful that he joined us. It's really very big of him to join us. We have not even started, and this is our first meeting, and I'm really grateful for this, Anil. Right. So Anil is basically an award-winning science writer, and he's a former staff writer and deputy news editor for London-based New Scientist magazine. And he is also a MIT Knight Science Journalism Fellow for 2019 and 20. He was trained as an electronics and computer engineer at IIT Madras and University of Washington, Seattle, and was working as a distributed system software architect before switching to writing. So of late, he has rediscovered his passion for engineering, has retrained in aspects of machine learning, and right now he is basically writing his new book, which is titled as Why Machines Learn, and it will be out in fall 2023. With insights gleaned during the writing of the book, he's now ready to engage with organizations seeking to implement safe, trustworthy, and socially responsible AI and ML strategies. So one more thing I would like to add about Anil is the interactions that I had with him during the Neuromatch workshop were basically amazing, and we kind of talked about more and more about, like, we had healthy discussions and long discussions about how we can achieve AGI and what is the path forward to achieve AGI basically. So now I would like to give the floor to Anil. Yeah.
Thank you, Anmol, for that very wonderful and kind introduction. I'm not sure what I will have to say that serves as the opening talk for this amazing forum. But I think, yeah, like Anmol said, a lot of us who are here today met during our Neuromatch workshop. And Anmol was our amazing TA, so we should point out that. And we had an amazing time on trying to understand some very difficult aspects of deep learning. So let me just, when Anmol had approached me, he said maybe I should just share with you guys just the path I took from being a software engineer to becoming a writer, and then eventually again discovering machine learning and deep learning and getting interested in it. So a long time ago now, I did my bachelor's at IIT Madras in electronics, and as was the case in those days, most of my classmates and we ended up abroad. I went to do a master's in electronics and computer engineering at the University of Washington in Seattle. After my master's, I came back to India. I was working in Bangalore. Those were the very early days of the software industry in India. So basically, if you started working in software, you got sent back to the US. You were body shopped right back. So I ended up back in Dallas for a while, and then I figured that if I have to be back in the US, I'm going to go look for my own job and not be body shopped. So I ended up in a company in Berkeley, California, and I really didn't realize what amazing work we were doing at the time. It's only in hindsight that it becomes obvious. Um, that was sort of mid 90s. We were switching from programming in C++ to programming in C to C++, and we were all very excited about object-oriented programming, and also we were building these massive distributed systems for telecommunication companies, and what we realized was that every time we would basically reinvent the wheel when we had to implement these projects. So somebody came up with a bright idea of first turning much of the code into a platform and then just customizing it for individual companies. And looking back, that platform was the precursor to what today you see as web servers. We didn't really know it at the time. Uh, for us, it was just massive distributed systems. In fact, it was much more complicated than most of the web servers today. But it was around that time when I was doing that work I also realized that I liked teaching and writing. I taught a course at UC Berkeley's Extension College on object-oriented programming and data communications. That course turned into a book, which was published by McGraw-Hill way back in the mid 90s. And then around that, and then I started thinking that I actually wanted to be a writer, not quite do the kind of software that I was doing. The software was exciting, but I think my mind was hungry for more. I really wanted to understand more about science, about physics, about, all the other kinds of sciences besides technology. So it took me about 4 years of thinking about how to do it, and I eventually went back to school. I basically went back to get a degree in science writing and science journalism. And once I finished that degree, I went to London to do an internship with New Scientist magazine. And then basically the last 20 years or so, I've been a science journalist, mostly writing and editing for New Scientist, but in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been completely freelance. I've been writing about all different kinds of sciences, physics, neuroscience, molecular biology, climate change. Yeah, that has been one of the most amazing things about this career, which is that every week you're kind of learning something new. There's hunger for learning. It's a wonderful field to be in. And the last 5 years, I've been writing mostly for places like Scientific American, Quanta, Nature, and magazines like that. And what I think Anmol mentioned that I did a fellowship at MIT about 2 years ago. This is the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship. And one of the wonderful things about that fellowship is that you get about an entire academic year to do anything you want. Basically, retrain yourself. And so I went back to school all over again. I went back. I really wanted to learn what was happening with machine learning. It had been 20 years since I had done any coding, and I was beginning to write a lot of these stories about AI, and I realized that, every time I would write one of these stories, a part of me would say, it's all fun and games writing about it, but I actually want to write the software. I wanted to code. So I went back to CS 101. I sat in, I basically sat with kids who are, learning, which most of you are. So it was fantastic. It was just amazing to, learn Python and teach myself PyTorch. And the project I did for my fellowship was basically trying to see if I could build a deep neural network that could make predictions about planetary positions, given the kind of data that Johannes Kepler had in the 1600s. So Kepler had access to observations of the positions of planets that his predecessor astronomer Tycho Brahe had collected. These were positions of Mars and Jupiter. And you can imagine these were very early days of observations with telescopes. The data was very, very sketchy, and it was not really a whole bunch of data. And Kepler somehow managed to look at all that data and come up with the 3 laws of planetary motion. And my intent in this project was to see if I could build a deep neural network that could take the kind of data that Kepler had and be able to predict where Mars would be, say 1 year into the future or things like that. And of course, the answer was no. That data that Kepler had was so little that no deep net would ever learn anything from that. So I ended up writing a small simulation of the solar system, generated a lot of data, and then, then I could, started figuring out how to turn that data into, a model, and ended up learning about, standard sort of layer perceptrons. In the end, turned out that I needed LSTMs in order to do the prediction because there's a time series involved here. That really generated a lot of interest. I towards the end of that fellowship, the pandemic hit, so I ended up back in California for a few months, locked up because of the pandemic. And while I was just sitting and twiddling my thumbs, I decided to do a full course in ML at Cornell. They have a lovely online course. And as I was doing that, I just completely fell in love with the mathematics of machine learning, and ended up talking to my publisher about writing a book on the mathematics of machine learning. So one of the things I didn't mention is that during the course of my journalism career, I've written 3 books. And those books, one was called The Edge of Physics, which is basically a travelogue to all the different telescopes and detectors around the world. I went to places like Siberia, to Chile, to Hawaii, all the way to the South Pole, to spent a month in Antarctica, and used travel writing as a way to talk about physics. The second book was on the nature of the human self and consciousness, and that is something I think I've talked with Anmol about, and he's very interested in those ideas. The third book was on quantum mechanics. So I had access to an editor and publisher with whom I could speak to about this course, about this book on machine learning. And I really wanted to write a book with mathematics in it. And if you guys have read books on popular science, it's very rare that you will see books with equations in it. Publishers don't like to publish books with lots of equations, let alone an entire book filled with it. And when I wrote the proposal, I was very clear that I wanted to write a book that was basically fundamentally about the mathematics with proofs and theorems. And I was prepared for the fact that my publisher would say no, that it's not a book for them, not a popular science book. And then I was thinking, once they say no, I'll go to some university press and try to convince them. But to my huge surprise, my publisher, Penguin Random House, they said yes. So now I'm sitting around writing a book on the mathematics of machine learning. And the NeuroMatch workshop sort of also was amazing. The amount we learned trying to do all the coding, conceptually amazing stuff. So I think I'll stop here. Just to, I mean, I guess the point I would like to make is that learning never needs to end. You can, there is just a world of knowledge out there, and the more you learn, the more connections you see in all the things that you do. So, for me, that's what makes every week worthwhile in terms of work. I'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the things that I talked about. If not, it's really a pleasure to be talking to all of you, and I hope this community takes off and lives up to everything Anmol and his colleagues want it to be. So thank you, Anmol, for having me speak here.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And as I tell you again and again that you are such an inspiration, like at least for me personally, because I had like highest regards keep keep learning basically, for people who can keep learning, and you are you're an inspiration for us basically. So
You're very, very
guys,
kind.
yeah, if anybody has any question, please go ahead. Now is the time. Otherwise, we'll start with the object detection part of our meetup basically.
Yeah. So I had a question. Like, um, I wanted to ask any advice for young people, like undergraduates who are starting out in their career,
Advice for what in particular? Like what?
like for deep learning data scientist roles.
Oh, I see. Um, I mean, probably Anmol will be better placed to talk about that, but I can tell you from my perspective that um, it's really worthwhile paying attention to the math. Um, there is something quite wonderful about understanding machine learning and deep learning mathematically, because it really tells you a lot about what's going on. And also, if you can, broaden your horizons beyond uh, the bare bones of data science and machine learning into things like what's happening in neuroscience, what's happening in biology, the various areas of applications that might interest you, astronomy. I mean, ML is everywhere. So So find a few domain areas that are of interest, and read up and understand what problems they are trying to solve, because machine learning becomes even more interesting when you think about you know a domain where you have problems to solve, and then you can start thinking about how to combine the two fields. So
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
yeah, thanks.
I had a question. So I would
Okay,
like to
thank you,
ask
Anil.
whether
So, any other questions, or then I will move to object
And then
lesson.
someone else was asking a question.
Okay,
Just
okay.
I was
Can you please repeat yourself?
yeah. So I was asking, since these ML and research, like ML and data science and all these are so research oriented, like is it necessary to have a PhD or something in
You
this
are
field?
not audible. Whoever is asking the question, can you please speak louder?
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible now. Yes, please go.
So I was saying, as these ML fields and all these data science fields are so research oriented, so is it necessary for a person to have a PhD or some deep research in this field to make a mark or something?
no, no. I mean, if you want to do research and you want to do a PhD, that's one thing, but you definitely don't need to have a PhD to make a mark. Um, you know, uh, I would say that just an interest, deep interest in it is probably much more important than trying to go after a PhD. If you want a PhD, that's a different thing, of course, and PhD is going to make you much better at doing research. But making, again, make you have to define for yourself what making a mark means. And if you want to make a mark in the area of research, well, that's one thing. But there are lots of application domains where, if you again, like, if you understand the math, if you get your coding skills in place and sharpen them, there's no reason to think that you can't make a mark in coming up with really good solutions for particular problems.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Hello, sir. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure,
Yeah,
go
of
ahead.
course.
Hello. Sir, I actually started research in deep learning and computer vision an year ago. So, and now I'm exposed to too many things from AI and all of that. And also, as you being a science writer, like how do you not wavered off the a certain topic, and how do you select the thing to write on basically? Because I have problem issue in selecting those things, and I keep wavering over to different topics at the same time. So I don't find a center point.
Um, well, I think the difference between what's happening with you and what I have to do is I have to earn a living doing what I'm doing right now. So the things I have to write about are basically decided, in terms of what's happening in science and what we think as writers and editors, what we think is interesting to communicate to the general public. So even though there might be things that seem very interesting, they might not fit the bill for a magazine. So there's a lot of other things that I have to consider in terms of choosing what to write about. And a lot of times editors decide what goes into the magazine, right? So I have constraints that I have to work with, and the reason why you are probably finding it hard to focus is because right now maybe there is no constraint on you, and I wouldn't worry too much about that at this point. Just just learn, and at the same time maybe pick one or two projects and go deep, because going deeper uh, in a single project is oftentimes very useful when you kind of zoom out again and start looking at things breadthwise. So it always is going to be a balance between broadening your horizons and then deepening whatever you're working on. So sometimes you go deep, and then zoom out, look at the breadth of it, and then go back deep again. So it's going to be a back and forth, so don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Anil. Thanks. Thank you very much. I keep telling him the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's working with us. He's like right now an intern with us. Yeah,
I see. Yeah.
yes. So shall I begin now with the object detection part? Any other questions? Okay, so let's move on to the other part now.